Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from the Father and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel he had wrapped around him. This morning we talked about this in Sunday school, and one of the things we talked about was the actual table that they were sitting at. The table that they were sitting at is called a triclinium. Did you know that? And a triclinium is just a square that's missing a side. It's like a square C going one direction like this. And the way that it works is, on one half of the table going around, the greatest would sit on one side, and it'd go all the way down to the least in order. And the host was the one who set the table. So the host was saying who the greatest was, and the host was saying who the least was. And if you read the passage, John, the little youngest John with no status, was sitting in the greatest seat next to Jesus, where the host sits, and the one who's sitting in the seat of honor was Judas himself. And the one sitting in the least seat was Peter. So whose job is it to wash feet if you're the least person in the room? It's Peter's job. But right before Peter could do so, Jesus gets up from the table and he starts washing the feet. We know the story. He casts aside his garments, kneels down and washes their feet. But this is the picture I want to paint for you today. John is leaning there when he sits back down with his head in Jesus' bosom because of how they sit. His head's in his chest. That's how they sat. They leaned back into each other. My question to you is, where was Jesus' head? If Judas is sitting next to him, Jesus' head is leaning into the bosom of Judas, knowing what Judas is about to do. And he just washed Judas' feet. Talk about the love of God. Knowing what he was going to do. The man who experienced Jesus in ways we could never fathom on this earth. Saw every miracle firsthand. Took part in some miracles firsthand. Had Jesus' head in his bosom right there, was his guest of honor, and said, here, eat this. That man, Jesus knew was going to betray him, and he washed his feet anyway. We have sin in our lives, don't we? Are we perfect? No. We're going to sin again, aren't we? We've done some really atrocious, disgusting things in our past, haven't we? Let's just be honest. Who in here has anybody got a clean past? Raise your hand. Anybody want to admit they got a disgusting past? Raise your hand. Come on, high. He knows. And he laid aside his garments. And he came down, heaven came down. He was born as man, died a cruel death on the cross, spiritually washed you, knowing who you are and who you're going to be. Is that not the gospel? That's the love of God. But it says he rose back and came back to the table. And that's what Easter's all about. He rose back and went back to the throne. And he's King of Kings. And he knows what you're going through and what you're going to go through. He knows your mistakes. He knows your habits. And he is faithful when we are faithless. Amen?